What are you thinking about right now? Not what you're doing or saying, but the thought that quietly slipped through your mind a moment ago. A single thought may be small, but repeated over time, it carves patterns into the soul. Before we chase solutions or frame our mindset, let us become still enough to see what's already growing inside us. Because thoughts do not merely describe reality, they create it. The screen glows, a message triggers annoyance. A headline sparks worrying, a photo stirs self-comparison. None of this feels dramatic, but all of it is absorbed. Your thoughts are being shaped not by truth, but by contact. It replays not for clarity, but for habit. The Stoics saw thought as the origin of all action. If your thoughts are shaped by fear, then so is your life. When a thought appears, you do not need to fight it. You stop believing every reaction is a truth. The mind softens. Not because it is dull, but because it is cared for. Like a field that is no longer wild, the thoughts begin to align with reason, with perspective, with purpose. This is what the Stoics meant by living in accordance with nature. Nature is not chaos. Nature is order with patience. You can simply ask, is this helpful? Is this in harmony with what I value? Not because thought is magic, but because thought is habit. And habit is destiny. This is not a warning. It is a quiet reminder. You are not the victim of your thinking. You are its curator, and you can choose. With each repetition, you either reinforce the identity given to you by the world or grow the one you choose deliberately. This is the slow art of becoming, and it always begins inside. Would I want this thought to be the seed of my future? The Stoics believed in thought as moral practice. Not because every thought is moral, but because each thought begins a direction, a gesture, a leaning, and enough leaning becomes character. If they are shaped by envy, then peace will remain distant. But if you begin to see thought as a tool, not a tyrant, you can begin to change the direction of your days. Slowly, deliberately, not by controlling every thought, but by noticing which ones return, and whether they deserve to. The mind has practiced certain loops for years. So, it follows them again. You feel uneasy, tired, overstimulated. We lack space. The mind is filled constantly. Notifications, suggestions, messages. The thoughts we think are rarely chosen. They are pushed, sold, repeated, and the mind becomes reactive. The Stoics would remind us that true freedom begins not with action, but with thought. Not every thought is worth repeating. Not every fear deserves your time. Marcus wrote, "You have power over your mind. Realize this, and you will find strength. Not noise, not speed, but strength in quiet discernment." But instead of stillness, your thoughts continue building the same structures. The Stoics would invite you to pause here, to not follow the loop, but observe it. Seneca said, "At night, when the world is quiet, we must ask ourselves, what did I do? What did I think? What did I allow?" Epictetus said, "We are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments we place upon them." But how many of those judgments are ours, and how many were fed to us? The thoughts come so quickly we often do not catch them, but the soul does, and it remembers. They form our perceptions, our emotions, our actions. In every moment, your mind is sculpting you. But beneath the visible flow of action, another current moves quietly. He meant that what you think repeatedly does not stay in the mind, it soaks into the being. A person who thinks bitterly becomes bitter, even if they smile. A person who thinks they are small will walk as if they are. This is not about self-esteem. It is about repetition. What we think most often becomes what we expect. What we expect becomes what we notice. What we notice becomes all we see. And soon, we no longer see clearly at all. You interpret a comment as disrespect. You see silence as rejection. You tell yourself you are falling behind again. These thoughts are not shouted. They are murmured. They do not surprise you. They feel like you, but they are not facts. They are assumptions that have been rehearsed so often that they now wear the mask of reality. And this is the danger the Stoics warned against. Thought becomes belief, and belief becomes identity. And so, the most urgent question we can ask today is not what the world demands of you, but what your own mind is quietly repeating. Let's listen. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who wrote by lamplight in the stillness of night, once said, "Your mind will take the shape of what you frequently hold in thought, a sentence, a fragment, a memory. Perhaps you think of the meeting you dread, the conversation you avoided, the unfinished list waiting for you. You have not opened your eyes fully, but your mind has. And in its familiar rhythm, it begins to narrate. This narration is not random, it is practiced. The mind is not a blank slate in the morning. It is a recording that resumes. The Stoics knew this well. They taught that every day is not a new life unless we treat it that way. Otherwise, it is only repetition. To him, thoughts weren't just mental activity. They were destiny in seed form. Think bitterly, and bitterness takes root. Think clearly, and clarity becomes your second skin. Without noticing, we are becoming the echo of our most frequent thoughts, shaping not just our moods, but the very lens through which we see life. Was it worrying, resentment, anticipation? We rarely notice them, these small inner whispers, but the Stoics did. They believed that our private thoughts, repeated in silence day after day, are not harmless. They are builders, laying bricks inside us. Welcome to Stoic Dharma. In this gentle space, we slow the world down to look closely at the invisible structure within. And today, we begin with one simple question. If you become what you think about most, then what are you becoming? The Stoics warned us, thoughts are not passing clouds, they are habits in disguise. So let us begin here, not with answers, but with observation. You wake up, the light is pale and quiet, the room is still. But inside your mind, something has already started. As you begin your day, the thoughts follow you. You make coffee, check your phone. You move through the day with tasks to do, people to speak with, goals to pursue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. In the evening, the mind does not rest. It replays the day, that moment of embarrassment, that tension left unresolved, the thing you forgot to say." This nightly examination was not about blame, it was about awareness. In the modern world, we do not lack information. So, how do we return to that inner clarity? We begin by watching, not with force, with calm attention. Over time, this attention becomes a habit. You begin to notice old patterns and gently step aside from them. You feed wiser thoughts instead. You plant calmer seeds. And so, day by day, you become what you think. The Stoics did not believe the mind was just a passive space for thoughts to drift through. They believed it was the seat of all power, not power over others, but power over the self. Power over judgment, reaction, and emotion. And the doorway to that power was the thought you chose to believe. Not just once, but again and again, they saw thought not as decoration, but as structure, and like all structures, it could be made strong or fragile. It all depended on what you built with. In the morning, they would reflect on the day ahead and prepare their minds to meet it well. Each morning, a Stoic might imagine what could go wrong. The insult, the failure, the loss. Not to dwell in fear, but to prepare the mind, to remind it that such things are not within our control, and that we still have the power to respond with dignity. When a thought arose that was harmful, they would not fight it directly. They would observe it, question it, and choose something better. You do not have to win the mind in a day. You only need to begin noticing it, to see the loops that repeat, to ask what story you keep telling yourself, and to wonder whether that story is worth living inside. Each time you question a thought that makes you bitter, you create space for something else. And over time, those small spaces become pathways. They guide you out of the prison of automatic thought and into the freedom of chosen thought. If the thought said, "I am failing," they would ask, "Is this based on reason or fear?" If the thought said, "This person is against me," they would ask, "Have I examined their intention?" They did not chase perfect thoughts, they chased useful ones. ones that served their values, not their impulses. If we rehearse how we will think when tested, we are less likely to collapse when it happens. In this way, the Stoic does not wait for wisdom to arise by accident. They build it in advance, and transformation begins not with books or debates, but with the quiet courage to watch your own mind, to see what it does when no one is watching, to admit what it clings to, and to let go, little by little, of the thoughts that keep you small. In doing so, you begin to walk a different path, a path not determined by reaction, but by reflection, a path where the mind is no longer your master, but your ally. And that, they believed, is the root of all wisdom. In the evening, they would look back and ask where their thoughts had led them astray. Because your thoughts shaped how you treated others, how you interpreted pain, and how you chose to live. A man who constantly thinks of what he lacks becomes resentful. A woman who always assumes the worst in others becomes defensive. But the one who trains their thoughts toward what is just, wise, and moderate becomes uncheckable. Not perfect, but centered. The Stoic aim was not perfection. It was progress in the right direction, and that direction began in thought. This was not about guilt. It was about precision, about turning the mind from a storm into a compass. He saw self-pity as a kind of poison. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality, he wrote. And this insight is more true now than ever, because in modern life, the mind is constantly pulled toward fear. News cycles, social media, advertisements, they are designed to capture your thoughts and steer them toward anxiety, envy, and desire. The Stoic stands in the middle of this storm and says, I choose what enters. I guard the gate of my own mind. Epictetus encouraged students to say, let me examine my thoughts. Let me see if they are in line with nature, reason, and virtue, not for others. For the self, Epictetus was born into slavery. He had no property, no freedom of movement, no voice in society. But he believed that even a slave could be free, if his thoughts were his own. He taught that, while the body can be chained, the mind cannot be touched unless you surrender it yourself. No man is free, he said, who is not master of himself, and mastery begins with thought. He urged his students to distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. Thought is always within, and that is where freedom must begin. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, sat in marble halls with golden ceilings. But he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Surrounded by politics, war, and betrayal, he turned inward for guidance. In his personal writings, which we now call meditations, he reminded himself daily to watch his thoughts. The happiness of your life, he wrote, depends upon the quality of your thoughts. This was not a slogan. It was survival. For Marcus, the battlefield of the mind was more dangerous than any war, because if he lost control there, he would lose himself everywhere. The Stoics did not chase positivity, they chased clarity. They did not tell you to think happy thoughts, they told you to examine your thoughts, to see which ones helped you live well, and which ones made you smaller. Marcus advised, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. It sounds simple, but it is the work of a lifetime. Because most people are ruled by thoughts they never questioned. They become puppets pulled by invisible strings. And the first step to freedom is to see the strings. So how did the Stoics train their minds? They practiced a form of mental rehearsal. There is a famous exercise in Stoic philosophy called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Thought was not neutral in Stoic philosophy, it was ethical. Seneca, the statesman and philosopher, advised against letting thought drift into complaint. But even the Stoics knew that some thoughts would sneak in. That is why they practiced not just mental defense, but mental redirection. This is not easy work, but it is steady work. The Stoics believed that the true mark of philosophy was not knowledge, but transformation. In the ruins of a Roman outpost along the Danube, buried beneath layers of time and silence, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected. Beneath the cracked stones and rusted fragments of armor, they found a series of wax-coated wooden tablets. They were small, fragile, and worn with age, but their contents were striking. Written in neat, repeated lines were sentences of thought, not military commands or logistical notes, but deliberate philosophical affirmations, and that training is often invisible. It happens in silence, when no one is watching, when it seems like nothing is happening, but each repetition is a drop in the bucket. It is a continuation of what you thought yesterday, and it becomes the foundation of what you will think tomorrow. That is why repetition matters. That is why the Stoics trained themselves to return to the same truths, over and over. The mind becomes a hallway with open doors, letting in every voice, every suggestion. Sometimes it is scratched into wax by callous hands under a gray sky. Sometimes it is not elegant, it is steady, it is small, but it endures. Because what we repeat, we become, and in times of fear, fatigue, or failure, it is the repeated thought, not the momentary feeling, that shapes our action. The Stoics knew this, and now, through earth and silence, they remind us still. And in that noise, we lose the signal. The Stoics offer another way, not control, but curation. A slow, steady shaping of the inner world. Write down the thoughts you wish to become, speak them, reflect on them. When something disturbs you, return to them. When doubt rises, revisit them. This is not performance, it is construction. You are building the foundation of how you will face the world. You have power over your mind, wrote Marcus Aurelius, not outside events, but that power weakens without maintenance. Thought left untrained becomes reactive, it bends toward fear, envy, and resentment. But thought trained in wisdom becomes sturdy, like a ship built for storms. And over time, the bucket fills. When adversity strikes, you do not invent strength. You draw from what you already planted. That is why the Stoics emphasize daily practice. A mind untrained will betray you in difficulty, but a trained mind will remain unmoved. I do not fear death, only disgrace. My body may weaken, but my judgment remains strong. At first, it looked like simple repetition. In Zen Buddhism, thought is observed without clinging, returning again and again to stillness. In Christian monasteries, monks recite scripture and prayer to shape the heart and mind in the image of virtue. These are not random rituals, they are architectures of thought. And the Roman soldier, carving a phrase into wax as the sky darkens over the Danube, participated in this same universal work, choosing what kind of mind he would carry into the world. But this was no accident. These were thought drills, mental exercises etched in wax, intended not just to be read but to be lived. These inscriptions, found in what was once a military training ground, gave modern historians a rare glimpse into how Roman soldiers fortified not just their bodies, but their minds. His hands are worn, his cloak thin against the wind. Around him are sounds of distant voices, clinking tools, restless movement. But he writes, slowly, intentionally, again and again. My life is not ruled by fate, but by reason. The repetition is not glamorous. No one applauds, but it becomes part of him. When the order comes to march, when arrows fall, when a friend dies, that thought returns. It does not make him immune to grief, but it makes him anchored. Not because the thought is magic, but because it was chosen. This practice, deeply rooted in Stoic philosophy, reflected a belief that strength was incomplete if it did not begin with thought. And here, in the frontier of the empire, where winter bit hard and death was never far, the soldiers practiced this discipline in quiet ritual. The thoughts repeated were not random, they were chosen for clarity and purpose. Misfortune is not in what happens, but in how I receive it. Pain is a lesson, not a punishment. These were not comforting slogans. They were tools, sharpened for survival. The idea was simple. In the chaos of war, you cannot choose what happens, but you can choose how to think. The soldiers who carved those phrases were not merely rehearsing lines, they were constructing identity. They were embedding resilience into memory, layering courage into the unconscious, one stroke at a time. Just as muscle is built by repetition, so too is character. These wax tablets were, in essence, mental weightlifting. The Stoics taught that the mind must be trained with the same discipline as the body. Epictetus, though never a soldier, would have approved. He insisted that freedom begins in the mind. Born into slavery, he rose not through wealth or status, but through mastery of his own thinking. He taught that the wise man practices internally for all that might come. If insulted, he rehearses patience. If injured, he rehearses endurance. Thought becomes preparation, and preparation becomes peace. What the soldier inscribed on those wax boards was not performance, it was practice. Practice for the moment when fear arises and reflex takes over. The idea was to train the reflex to, not to react in panic, but to return to principle. This idea was echoed centuries later in a modern saying, "We do not rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training." These ancient drills mirror practices found across cultures. In the Vedic tradition, mantras are repeated daily to realign the mind with truth. We often forget that thought is habit. What you think today is not isolated. Imagine now that young Roman soldier, seated near the firelight, stylus in hand. Today, we rarely choose our thoughts so deliberately. We scroll, we absorb, we react. The tablets buried in that frozen outpost remind us that wisdom is not always spoken in temples or debated in courts. In the still halls of a Buddhist monastery, a monk sits silently. His eyes are lowered, his breath steady, his posture unmoving. Mind precedes all things. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-made. If one speaks or acts with a corrupted mind, suffering follows, as the cart follows the hoof of the ox. It is not a metaphor, it is a law of being. Marcus Aurelius, in his journal, wrote not to impress, but to return his mind to reason. His words were not ornate. They were reminders. Is this in my control? Is this thought helpful? Is this aligned with nature? In the East, the same questions take different forms. Is this thought skillful? Does this thought cause harm or healing? Both traditions understand that we are never neutral. Each thought is a step, and over a lifetime, those steps form a path. The question is, where is it leading? The mind is a river. The mind is a garden. The mind is a mirror. Each points to the same truth. The river flows, but you can direct its course. Your thoughts are not just passing events. They are the builders of your soul. What you think repeatedly becomes what you believe. What you believe becomes what you see. What you see becomes how you act. And how you act becomes who you are. In every tradition, the question echoes, what are you allowing to live in your mind? Because what lives there, eventually, becomes you. The garden grows, but you must decide what to plant. The mirror reflects, but you can wipe it clean. In all of these, there is agency. Not the agency of control, but of stewardship. You are not a slave to thought. You are its host, its caretaker, and, eventually, its guide. The thought you allow to linger becomes the tone of your voice, the rhythm of your step, the shape of your destiny. But the ancients remind us, the value of thought is not in how fast it moves, but in where it leads. Wisdom is not information, it is alignment. To think in a way that reflects your highest values, to choose thought as one chooses companions. Deliberately, kindly, and with great care. That is the invitation, to not just think, but to think well. Before intention, there is thought, and so, if you wish to change your life, you must begin not with the external, but with the mental. In yogic practice, especially in jnana yoga and meditation, practitioners are invited to sit quietly and observe the fluctuations of the mind. These fluctuations are called vritas, the waves of thought. And the goal is not to stop the waves completely, but to know their nature, to see their patterns, and eventually to calm the waters. If the mind is turbulent, life becomes turbulent. If the mind is clear, the world regains order. And the uncontrolled mind as the worst of enemies, it does not say this lightly. A mind that is left to run wild will chase pleasure, flee pain, and react impulsively. A mind that is trained will see clearly, choose wisely, and remain stable through gain and loss. The Stoics would agree. Seneca wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself, and that mastery begins not in speech or action, but in thought." From the outside, it looks like nothing is happening, but within, a vast process is unfolding. He is watching his thoughts. Thought is the seed of destiny. It may be invisible, silent, even unnoticed, but it shapes how we interpret the world, how we treat others, and how we understand ourselves. If you tell yourself daily that the world is cruel, you will only see cruelty. If you repeat the belief that you are weak, you will stop trying. But if you return, patiently and deliberately, to thoughts of clarity, kindness, and purpose, you slowly begin to live them. Not through force, through familiarity. Each idea, each image, each worry or hope is not passing through us, it is forming us. Just as a farmer tills the land, waters the seed, and protects the soil from weeds, the meditator tends to thought with gentleness and discipline. In mindfulness practice, when the mind wanders to anger or anxiety, one does not attack the thought. One notices it, names it, and returns to the breath again and again. It may seem small, even pointless, but over time, the brain rewires, the thought patterns soften. The inner world becomes less chaotic, more navigable, and so, like the Stoics, the Buddhists ask us to become caretakers of our own minds. To not just consume thoughts, but to choose them. To not be ruled by the constant noise of craving, fear, and distraction, but to become aware of it. Not through punishment, through stillness. In meditation, one learns not to stop thought, but to relate to it differently. He is not suppressing them, not chasing them, not entertaining them. He is observing, like a mountain watches the clouds drift past its peak. This practice, thousands of years old, echoes a truth that transcends culture and time. Thought is not neutral, thought is creation. What the mind thinks, the world becomes. The Dhammapada, one of the most ancient Buddhist texts, opens with a declaration that resonates across centuries. In this vision, thought is not just something we have, it is something we are. The word for meditation in Sanskrit is bhavan, which means mental cultivation. It is the deliberate act of shaping the mind. This is not far from what the Stoics practice in their daily reflection. In the Yogic tradition of India, particularly Raja Yoga, thought is seen as the first movement toward action. Before there is behavior, there is intention. The Bhagavad Gita, another sacred text of India, speaks of the disciplined mind as the best of friends. There is something beautifully universal here. Different language, different cultures, but the same insight. Many teachers in these traditions use metaphors of nature to describe the mind. In the modern world, we often associate thought with intellect. We value speed, logic, productivity. And so, whether in the stone silence of a Zen temple, the warm glow of a Vedic hut, or the written reflections of a Roman emperor, the message is consistent. The modern world is a storm of information. At every moment, our senses are flooded. Notifications buzz, headlines flash, opinions scroll past like lightning. There is no pause, no stillness. Thought has become reaction. Realize this and you will find strength. But in modern life, outside events have invaded the mind itself. Your mood rises and falls with every comment, every headline. But they practice mental discipline precisely because the world was unpredictable. We are lost in thought patterns we did not choose. We rehearse fears planted by strangers. We compare ourselves to lives that are curated illusions. We spend hours thinking about things that do not matter, and minutes reflecting on what truly does. The Stoics would urge us to pause, to clear the mental desk, to ask, what am I feeding my mind? We can choose thoughts that heal, that ground, that illuminate. It is where your story begins and ends. You may not control what happens around you, but you can shape what happens within. Every thought is a seed, Every repetition is water. And over time, your inner world grows a garden, whether wild or wise. The Stoics knew this. The Buddhists lived this. The sages of every path pointed back to the same place. Your attention is your compass. It takes practice. It takes patience. But it begins now. The next thought is yours to choose. Let it be one that reflects the life you wish to live. Let it be clear, kind, courageous. Let it be yours. And when you stray, return to it again. That is the path. Thought by thought, you return to yourself. Not perfectly, but patiently, and in that return, you find not only peace but freedom. Is this thought mine? Or did I borrow it without noticing? They knew that the mind must be guarded, or it would become a mirror of chaos. What ideas do I nourish when no one is watching? Because these quiet repetitions are not insignificant. They are the foundation of the life you build. And if you do not choose them with care, someone else will choose them for you. They were taught to question assumptions, to examine beliefs, to trace thoughts to their roots. This is the training we lack today. You can reclaim your thought life by observing it. Notice what you dwell on. Notice what repeats. Ask if that repetition is building you or breaking you. Begin small, one thought in the morning, chosen with care. One moment of silence before reacting. One phrase you carry in your pocket like a talisman. I am not what happens to me. I am what I choose to become. Repeat it. Live it. We are taught to produce, to perform, to achieve. The Stoics remind us that thought is structure. What you build with thought becomes your character. Together, they offer a complete picture. As the days pass, you will begin to notice the gap between stimulus and response. You will find space where there used to be tension. You will notice yourself thinking before reacting, pausing before judging, breathing before fearing. And in that space, you will find yourself again, not the self others projected. The self you remember, the self you choose. A mind shaped with care becomes a life shaped with meaning. A mind neglected becomes a life lost in noise. The choice is ours, not once, but every day, thought by thought, breath by breath. But rarely to reflect, rarely to return inward. The Stoics practiced this daily, a morning reflection, an evening review, a midday pause, small habits that guarded the mind from becoming a stranger. Today, we have access to more knowledge than any generation in history. But wisdom remains rare, because wisdom does not come from knowing more. It comes from thinking better. Your values blur, your purpose fades. The Stoics warned against this. They taught that clarity of thought is clarity of life. Seneca advised, associate only with people who improve you. Welcome those whom you yourself can improve. But how can we choose who to associate with if we do not even choose what to think? We check our phones first thing in the morning and let others set the tone for our day. We absorb hundreds of impressions before breakfast. Our minds are no longer private, they are public arenas, constantly reacting. And this erosion of inner space has consequences. The mind, once a sacred space, has become a hallway of noise, filled with the echoes of other people's voices. And in this endless noise, something quiet and precious is being lost, the ability to choose our thoughts. In ancient times, the mind was treated with reverence. It was a place to return to reflect, to guide. Today, the mind is under siege. We are told what to fear, what to desire, what to think. Algorithms decide what we see. Social media rewards outrage. Advertising exploits insecurity. The result is not awareness, but confusion. Not thoughtfulness, but fragmentation. We are thinking more, but understanding less. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." When you do not choose your thoughts, you lose your direction. You begin to drift. This is not a call to reject the world. The Stoics lived in the world. They governed, they taught, they fought wars, they raised families. The real crisis of our time is not distraction. It is direction. We are not just distracted. In ancient schools of philosophy, students were taught not just what to think, but how to think. We need not abandon modern life to practice this, we need only return to it with intention. The Eastern philosophies remind us that thought is energy. Where your thoughts go, your life flows. This is not an easy path, but it is a peaceful one. You will not master it quickly, but you will feel its effects quietly. We live in a time of mental pollution, but we are not helpless. We can become stewards of our minds. In a world of speed and noise, the mind has become the last quiet frontier. So ask yourself now, gently, without judgment, what am I becoming by the thoughts I think every day? What do I rehearse in silence? There is no need to make grand changes. Begin simply. Begin with awareness. Let your next thought be chosen, not inherited. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.